Today's World Insight, the pulse on the vital signs of China's business climate from captains of industry. Tonight, a mining magnate, used to be the top Canadian diplomat of China, talks about his incisive economic outlook and how metal industries can go green.
What we're very keen on is how do we tap into the technology that's being developed here to be able to take it global. We need to use that in our facilities in other parts of the world, in North America and in Australia, because it's really high quality, but people aren't aware of it.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian. What role does business play in a shifting global context? Recently, I asked that question to a number of business leaders who have profound knowledge about business, geopolitics, and have been working on China in various capacities. Today, let's meet first Dominic Barton, Rio Tinto chair, who also served earlier as Canadian ambassador to China from the year 2019 to 2021 after working for a global consultancy group. Recently, he is in China to reconnect with his partners and feel the real pulse of China and the world from a different perspective. He also spoke at the Global Trade and Investment Promotion Summit held in Beijing to discuss economic growth and global investment. In my in-depth interview with him, he talked about how business adapt in a fast-changing world, the outlook on China's economy, and how China's steel industry could go green. Rio Tinto, the world's biggest iron ore miner, aims to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050 and a 50% reduction by the year 2030. The company's commitment coincides with China's efforts to make its steel industry a low-carbon emitter. So happy to see you, Mr. Barton, here in China.
It's wonderful to be back. I'm very excited.
I know when you are saying wonderful to be back because you've been coming back and forth between China and other parts of the world with different titles. But this time, 3 years after the pandemic, I'm sure you have your own observations and takeaways.
Yeah, first of all, as I said, it's just great to be back. There's a energy about China that's very distinctive. It's just a vibrancy, ideas, people working hard, and that's very much there. And I wondered, because I know it had been a very tough period around the world, but also here. But I see a kind of a determination. I think there's going to be it's sort of a newer growth model, high quality growth as opposed to just growth. I think people are not as worked up about let's have a specific number. It's about the approach that's actually taken and how it moves. And I think there's just some themes that you can see coming to life, particularly on the green tech side of it. I think China's much more advanced than people estimate from outside. There's just a lot happening on that front. So there's a whole range of things where you see momentum while it's still coming out of COVID. So I think we also need to just acknowledge that too. It's not, at least it takes time to get to full speed, but let's not worry about that. It'll get to full speed.
There are a lot of moving factors around, but how do you see, the momentum is coming back? I'm sure during your trip here, talking to your Chinese partners, policymakers, and just your colleague here in China, what is your sense of, the ambience in a way?
I think again, one of the distinctive parts of the, if I could call it the China economic development approach, is this long-term fundamentals. It's not about trying to do short-term actions, it's core. So I see that continuing. So there's been a very significant, this push toward the higher quality growth. How do we unlock the consumer, which is, at 39% of GDP, it's at 69% in the US, 63%. That's going to be a big opportunity. How do you can't tell people to do that. You have to build the confidence. And I see a very thoughtful approach to how that is being done. Financial market development, a shift along with real estate. This real estate shift that's going on is fundamental. It's important for the economy. Any transition in real estate is going to be difficult. But the fact that the country's brave enough to do it is good, because it's going to set an equilibrium, a longer term equilibrium, and people can think about putting their savings in not just real estate, but in asset management, financial products. I see pension reform that is occurring. And I see a lot on this focus on skill building. How are we going to make sure that we are providing the skills for the new jobs that are being created as we move ahead? So I see, in terms of your sense of the ambiance, there's a focus on fundamental drivers of let's get this right. Let's not be distracted if they don't work perfectly. We're going to get it right, because that will lead to more of a long-term approach. That's my sense.
Yeah. And what does that mean for your business?
It's very important for our business. You know, China is an extremely important market for Rio Tinto, and has been actually for 120 years. You know, we started selling borates from California.
Yeah.
And obviously with iron ore, but also copper, it's fundamentally important, and this is a growing economy. I mean, it's $18 trillion. It's going to be responsible for a third of the world's growth. We shouldn't forget that. A third of the world's growth this year and even though that's not going to be, I think, what Chinese leadership would say full tilt, that's the way it is. And that's, for us as a market, that's extremely important. There's a demand for these materials that are required for the energy transition, and that's what we're about. The other aspect I'd say, which is, again, if I could call it part of the new era that we're in, is around the technology and the talent. You know, Rio Tinto buys $2 billion worth of services and products and technology from China every year. It's been going up. What we're very keen on is how do we tap into the technology that's being developed here to be able to take it global. We need to use that in our facilities in other parts of the world, in North America and in Australia, because it's really high quality, but people aren't aware of it.
Indeed.
And that's what so it's really now around technology and talent, and we're a buyer, if you will, and we want to be able to use that. So that's a bit of the shift for us. But this is a
fundamental shift, isn't it,
Yeah.
that we are seeing today. A lot of people do not realize the logic has changed.
Yeah.
So how would you inform them? How do you see the deficit of information, the deficit of perceptions? This has become such a big problem for all of us in terms of rhetoric shapes reality, but actually it should be the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. I think we have a massive perception gap. I mean, as I've said, and I'm not trying to, sound like a sycophant here, but the understanding of what's going on here, just at a basic level in the West, and I, by the way, include myself in that, even though I'm a student of here, it's very low. People here know more about the West than the West knows about China. It's just a fact, and we need to work on that. And the fact is, in the technology side, there has been huge advances. I mean, electric vehicles, I think the world's now seeing, because the Chinese players dominate that market. And it's happened very quickly. And so I think part of it will be some of these Chinese companies going global. You're seeing them in Europe, you're seeing them in other parts of the world, and people are looking at these vehicles like they're from outer space. And that's a signal, and I think that's going to help with part of the perception. I think the other thing we also just have to acknowledge is we've had COVID, and there just hasn't been the sort of the interaction anywhere near like it should be, and that causes problems. So then each side kind of becomes a vague monolithic. The West or the United States is kind of this monolithic group. China is seen as this vague monolith, and that's just not true. It's people. It's innovators. It's different dynamics and views, and we're going to have to close that gap.
This is so important, but many say this is not just about resuming, it's about relearning. And that relearning process, as you know, after being in China back and forth many years, it's going to be tough under the current circumstances. What does that mean for businesses or business leaders like you? I see alongside you had earlier, it's really a natural reaction, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think we all have to step up and try and do our part, our small part in explaining showing what's happened. No one's going to do it for us.
No.
And
you are the pioneers, by the way, the business community these days around the world.
We need to talk about what it is that we're doing and explain to people. And I don't think I'm the best communicator publicly, but we, in our narrowcast, just explaining to people at universities, with some government decision makers, with some of the innovators that are out there, with fellow business leaders, this is what's actually happening. This is where there's a lot of opportunity, and we need to do that. And if we just put our heads down and hide, it's going to be a bad outcome. And so I think it's required that we step up, and that may be difficult because there will be people that will not like that and will attack that.
Sometimes you felt even being caught in between.
Yes.
But what does it take to be a bridge builder? Sorry, I'm going very, on the philosophical front, but I think it's very critical that we hear from business leaders like you who are seasoned about China and who are seasoned in different parts of the sector, politics and businesses. So what does it take to be a bridge builder today? Because business is really about building bridges.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that I think at the core of it is relationships, which is probably an obvious thing to say, but is not. We don't do it enough. And so I think whether you're in business or the public sector or the cultural sector, it's about relationships, and those take time to build, and you need to nurture them, and that means you spend time.
Yes.
And you go back, quality time, you go back and forth, and you have a curious mindset. You don't have I'm trying to teach you something. You just are trying to be aware and learn where it is, and recognize that it's going to be different. Because one of the challenges, I think, is, in these relationships, is kind of, we want people to be like us, or you really are like, I'm just trying to figure that out. Well, actually, there are differences, and you need to understand that, respect it, learn it. And to me, it's like a pyramid. In my time, I guess from 2000 to today, I feel like I'm at sort of level 3 of a 50 level, and the more time I spend here in I realize it's deeper. And so you need people to help you who by the way, may not be in business. It may be cultural. It may be in the entertainment business. It may be in film. It may be arts. It may be sports. Don't get narrowcast or siloed. I think it's very important to broaden out. And then remember, I love that there's the old friend saying. There are many old friends that you can have a relationship with for decades, but you have to invest. And we need to be doing more of that, not transacting, but investing in relationships.
Talking about your businesses, new technologies has been the key, and also green development, certainly all over the world. How do you, resource-centered company, be able to, do that galloping and even cross over that huge river, as we say, fill in the stones, or you have your own bridges? I don't know, but tell me more about how you are trying to do that.
Well, this is an extremely important area, the R&D, because we're not, I would say, in the mining business, we're in the materials business. And this is something Jakob, the CEO, who I know you've met, has really been driving home. We're in the materials business. And that means that we're actually in a technology business. Dan Jurgen would say Rio Tinto is a technology company. And so what's our R&D that we're doing? And we have a chief scientist. Not many organizations have a chief scientist. And we have then centers of R&D. They can't just be in one place in this global world. And we have one here in Beijing, we have one in Shanghai, we have one in Brisbane, we have one in Melbourne, we have one in Montreal, we have one in Reading in the UK. And what's very important about these is they're open architecture. There's a mindset of, we're not going to figure this stuff out ourselves. Also, it's a venture capital organization, and they're investing in green technology initiatives all around the world. One most recent ones I did a teach-in was actually a lab in Stanford that's looking at lithium recycling. You know,
Yes.
to worry about these batteries, we're just chucking them. Oh, how do we recycle it? There's a lab in Stanford that's actually figured out how to recycle it. Interestingly, they're all Chinese scientists. They're in Stanford that's doing, but and so what we're trying to do is how can we help them if it's a viable idea, which we think there is some. How do we scale that? So that it's a kind of an open architecture approach. Ideas are happening all over the world. As I mentioned, there's a lot happening here that we need to learn a lot about. Fortunately, we have a really talented group in Beijing and Shanghai, but it's looking at technology. This isn't a sales organization. It's where is the technology? What relationships do we have? For example, we have a 10-year relationship with Tsinghua University on the technology side.
But this transformation is going to cost business bucks, right? Just as a matter of fact. So how would you, as the chairman, be able to talk to all those critical stakeholders that you are dealing with every day to make sure this transition will be fundamental and will not be just halfway?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think because we are involved in this material science, which is capital projects are a big part of it, where you see the returns over a long period of time. We're saying we will continue to do that. That's a mindset we have, but we need to do it more now with technology and R&D. So we're spending about $400 million a year. That number is going up, and no matter what happens, if there's a downturn, that we will not touch that. That has to continue because it's what generates the ideas and generates the change. I mean, right now, as the chairman, I am benefiting from the chairman and the CEO and the leadership team that existed in 1995. They are the reason why we have the cash flows that we do and what we're driving. And so my question is, in 20 years from now, what are people going to say about us?
Do you have answers?
I hope I have good enough answers, but I really, that's the question is what have you done? What did you build? Because it's easy to short-term optimize. I could crank up the returns, well, Jakob could in a big way, but that's absolutely not what we want to do. We want to build, and it's not just also the R&D and the reserves that we need to have and the exploration and the mine sites. It's also how we develop our talent, how we run our processes and do them in a way that's going to be consistently better and better. Through
how you build your partnership.
How you build your, and that's a
how do you maintain and build your trust?
Yeah, trust in the society in which you operate, which mining companies haven't done a very good job of. We're pretty low on the scale in terms of, of trust on that front, and that has to change, or we're not going to make the energy transition happen.
I see you're doing a lot of ESGs around the world, and the projects are escaping ever more environmentally friendly and working with the local community. But having said that, though, let me ask you, because this is not just about your company, it's about your generation of business community. What kind of answer are you going to provide for 10 years or 20 years from now, whether it's climate change or whether it is the moving geopolitical factor that having tremendous impact on the nature of business today?
It completely is. It's got more and more tense, almost every year, and that it worries me because that's not at all what we need if we're going to be able to all make it, and we've got to have more of a collective sense of what we're trying to drive. And as I said, I think it's up to business leaders. They have a part. We can't do everything. I don't want to sound arrogant, but we've got to talk about these longer term issues, and we've got to argue and fight back when we think something isn't right. And that's in all aspects. It's not the role of a multinational is changing now. It's very different than it was even 10 years ago.
How is it changed?
I think on a number of dimensions. One word you've just mentioned, which I think is fundamental, is partnerships. You don't have to do it all in where it is. One example, it's not in our industry, but I was actually quite inspired by it just from this trip. McDonald's, a U.S. company, is going to see the largest expansion in their entire history, from what I understand, 1,000 restaurants that are going to be built in China.
Yes, indeed.
But they've got Chinese partners. There's McDonald's, and I may not get the numbers right.
And they even have a Chinese name, by the way.
But you know what I mean? And I think we have to we have to think broadly. And by the way, this is the same. If we were only operating in Canada, the United States, and in Australia, we'd also have to be thinking that way too. So we need to be thinking about partners in terms of geographies and countries, but also partners in terms of capabilities. We can't do it all. We need technology partners who are going to help us drive things. We need to have, if I think about all of the talent that's now being developed to do the ecological side of things, that we're hiring anthropologists, we're hiring, biodiversity. It's a broader range of people, but we also need help.
We need that. Their input.
Totally. Yeah.
Tell me more about how do you see the role of investment in today's world? Since we are talking about we need to have mutual beneficial relationship, and also it needs to be broadened than just the business that I'm doing right now.
I have to tell you, I'm a globalist, even though that may not be popular. I'm a globalist because I think it fundamentally leads to better prosperity for everyone if we do it. We haven't maybe done it very well, we haven't explained it or seen it very well, but it's critical to improving people's lives. But a core element of that is investment, and the way you bring a capability into a place is often through a capital investment, and it's also a way of cementing partnerships. So, for example, just for Rio Tinto, we're investing here in China. We're investing, in partners and technology companies that we work with. We also have our partners here who are investing with us in Australia, in the mine sites. Baowu, and I think that's very important for aligning interests and where we are. So we need to be able to do that, to be able to facilitate this transition that we all need to go through.
You're yourself right now. You're a company based in London.
Yes.
A lot of Australian input.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you also have Chinese partners working with you very closely. If I think about it, it's mind-boggling. A lot of different kinds of relationships going on when it comes to geopolitics. How would you be able to figure out the space in which you can operate?
Yeah, well, I think that what's different about this era compared to the era where I spent a lot of my private sector life before was, if it was more of an open capitalistic system with not much government involvement. It was, and businesses got along with what they're doing. Governments really didn't play a strong role, and if they did, they could get punished because people wouldn't come in and do it. We're in a completely different world now where government actually matters. You have to be able to work in that context. So that scenario,
and not be overwhelmed by governments at the same time.
That's exactly it. You have to, and that's why your point. We have to navigate our way. And I think at least what we're trying to do is say, we have a purpose. We want to provide the materials that are going to help with the energy transition. I think it's a noble purpose. It's good. It's something I get excited about. I think a lot of stakeholders can. That's what we're trying to do. But in a world that's becoming more complicated, and what we need to do is make sure that we're looking at that from a global perspective. That's where shareholders matter. Shareholders want us to make the right decisions from a return, and that's helpful. We will. It's a good forcing mechanism. But we also have to have the license to operate in these different countries, and then that will require partnerships. It requires investment. It requires being very thoughtful about the actual type of business that we want to operate in there. So I think having a clear purpose, having a good understanding of the context, which has changed, and I think will continue to change, and then we can find our way to navigate in that. But I think it's also important to have an ambition. Rio Tinto is 150 years old, and it's one of the most significant companies in the world. I don't not sound arrogant, it's one of the most. But and it can make a difference.
It is.
But if we don't
look at the market share,
if we don't work on that and have an ambition, we may not be into it. So how do we make sure we're relevant? And by relevance means we're performing, we're delivering what all these different groups want to have, and talent's excited about joining us.
Finally, before we go, very briefly, I know you're going to meet a lot of Chinese friends, Chinese partners, and also the potential partners. what are the questions you are going to ask them, when you see them? Off the record, when I'm saying the question you're asking them. What are you going to ask them? One or two questions. What are the key?
One is what's the research and the ideas that you're most excited about working on? Don't talk to me about I don't want to hear any of that's important, but just tell me what you're excited about, what you want to drive, and where you want to go. That's the first one, because there's a lot of creative talent, people that are driving things, and I don't want it to get overwhelmed with the geopolitics. So that's the first part of it. And the second is try and understand. It's about this relationship. What drives that? What are you like? What excites you? What's this person like?
Yeah.
Where I want to know the character of the individual, and that's something we do globally, right? But so it's what are you passionate about, and who are you?
Yeah. See them in their eyes.
Yeah.
And also see the shoes they're wearing.
Exactly.
Because we're not doing Zoom anymore.
Yeah.
Mr. Barton, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks for watching.